Hello everyone, and welcome to Daily God Gems with Lisa Renee. Today I am going to review the book, The Return of the Gods by Jonathan Cahn. This is a very powerful book. If you would like to know what is behind the darkness that is happening in our country, in our world, throughout modern civilization, the evil that is creeping into our society, creeping into our children's schools, into our workplaces, even the places we shop. We see it everywhere. It's growing and expanding with new evils bearing its head everywhere. We constantly see something new that is shocking, and we ask ourselves, why is this happening? Why has society changed so much? It's not what I recognized from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. This book tells you what is behind it all. It is explosive and powerful. So I am going to read from chapter 6, which gives you a basis of this book and a launching pad for what Jonathan writes about. He starts with quoting Matthew chapter 12, verses 43 through 45, where Jesus is giving a parable to his disciples. When an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places, seeking rest, and finds none. Then he says, "I will return to my house from which I came." What does that mean? And how does it relate to the matter of the gods, and what significance could it have concerning modern times? The passage speaks of a man possessed by an unclean spirit. The man is delivered of that spirit. The spirit then wanders through dry places, presumably the desert, but finds no place to rest. It then decides to return to its house, its formerly possessed man. But when it returns, it finds that its former dwelling place, the man, is empty, swept clean, and set in order. The cleansed state of the vessel leads the spirits to go and bring back 7 other spirits more evil than itself. So the man is now possessed by 7 spirits in addition to the original one. He is thus now in worse condition at the end than he was at the beginning. At first glance, it would seem that the parable is talking about a possessed and delivered man who then becomes repossessed. It certainly could be applied to a possessed individual, but the parable is actually not talking about the man at all. It is only an illustration, an example, an analogy used to reveal a spiritual principle and give a prophetic warning. The key comes in the last words of the parable. After stating that the last state of the man is worse than the first, Jesus adds, "So shall it also be with this wicked generation." Thus, the parable is not about an individual possession, but about a collective or mass possession, the possession of a generation, of a culture, of a civilization. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire and Western civilization comprised a house of spirits, a civilization possessed of gods and spirits. But into that house came the Word of God, the Spirit of God, the gospel. Western civilization was thus set free from the spirits and became, as in the parable, a house set in order, a civilization cleansed. So then what happened to the principalities? The parable answers that. The spirits still exist, but now dwell outside the house. So in the case of Western civilization, the spirits that once possessed it still existed, but now dwelled outside the borders of that civilization. They roamed the dry places, the desolate lands. They dwelled in the shadows. They dwelled in exile. The spirit in the parable finds no rest, so it seeks to return to its house to repossess it. When Jesus was about to cast the spirits out of the possessed man, known as the demoniac, it is recorded that the spirits pleaded with him to cast them into the nearby herd of pigs. The spirits are parasitic. They need a place to possess. Thus, the spirits cast out of Western civilization, if they find no rest, if they find no comparable civilization to possess, they will seek to return to what they believe is their house. And thus, we would expect that the same spirits that once possessed Western civilization would do so again. But the question must be asked, how could the spirits return to the house from which it has been dispossessed? It could only do so if the house has become unoccupied, empty, and the door has been left open. And the parable continues. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of the man is worse than the first. So since the house is clean, swept, and in order, the spirit brings in 7 other spirits to join in the repossession. The implication is that if the house had not been cleansed and set in order, the spirit would not have brought back the other spirits to occupy it. And herein lies the warning. The house that is cleansed and put in order but remains empty will be repossessed. And if it should be repossessed, it will end up in a worse state than if it had never been cleansed. What happens if we apply this to an entire civilization? It would translate to this. Should a culture, a society, a nation, or a civilization be cleansed or exorcised of the gods and spirits, but then remains or becomes empty, it will be repossessed by the gods and spirits that once possessed it, and more. And it will end up in a far worse state than if it had never been cleansed. It will, according to the parable, end up many times more possessed and evil than before. But in the case of Western civilization, how would it happen? How would the spirits re-enter the house from which they were cast out? How would the gods return? In the scriptural account of exorcism, the spirits are cast out by the word and power of God, and in the name and authority of Jesus. When the Roman Empire and Western civilization were delivered from the spirits and gods, it happened the same way. Therefore, how could the spirits and gods return to Western civilization? Only one way. If that civilization should ever turn away from God, from His Word, from the gospel, from Christianity, from Jesus, if it should do so, then that which drove out the spirits will no longer be present to protect it against their return, and the civilization that had been delivered of the spirits will become repossessed by them. The gods will return. So that gives you a launching point for this book. When you read this book, it will just blow your mind about the different entities that are taking repossession of Western civilization and modern civilizations. And I highly recommend this book. It will show you about all these mysteries, and it will open your eyes and make sense of all the evil that is happening around us and why. Everyone have a wonderful day, and God bless you.